And then you can't restart. Wow, that's a lot. Yeah. This is the chair that I feel like it's my spot. I started I don't get to the office. I'm lobbying when there's always so much other new chairs. Yeah, that's what it is. You know, you think, I don't know. Yeah, I'm writing for a machine that watch. You know, people were hating that. It's the growth fund day, that's the coming here for. And then it's like, the budget review, it's just chat about it. Those are the walking.
I've been involved in that a lot. I'm probably doing more out there now. For the last couple of years.
Okay, fine. What's great about that is
No, not.
it's nice.
Basically doing just in-house stuff. We'll go inside every Sunday.
Can you just let me know that
Well, she says she would be a struggle.
yeah, she's got
Thanks. So then we're just waiting for maybe Eric to show up.
Yeah.
Eric Council.
The other bodies go out. Relatively.
right. We live early?
Yes. Morning. There's room up there.
Is there?
Yep.
Yeah, maybe even. There used to be like 37 council people, right?
16. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for the fifth meeting, 8 o'clock Friday morning after a long Thursday night football game for many of us, I'm sure. But victory was held last night for those that enjoy the Vikings, like myself. And so this morning we will have smiles, even though it's a little early, perhaps. We did forward to you the presentation in a narrative form to try to help you digest it a little bit more. However, of course, we'll also go through it today I've been battling a little illness, and so I will turn the meeting mostly over to Tim Burkhart, who you all are familiar with, to run the meeting, and he'll go through the roll call and other logistics to start out the meeting. In the room, just remember that when you speak, make sure your microphone is on by pressing the button, and then when you're not speaking, it helps to turn it off. But that way everybody can hear you. We do have some people participating on the Zoom link. We are also live on both cities' Facebook pages and on their local Grand Forks channel, TV channels. So again, I'll turn it over to Tim if you're ready, Tim.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, especially early. I don't know when 8 o'clock meetings became early, but it's early. So thank you. And, well, I did say I would do the introductions, but what I don't have in front of me that I thought would be on the screen would be a list of the ad hoc members, but actually I can pull that up if we pause for a minute. Apologize.
Tim, I can do that. If you could turn your volume up too, or if John in the control room can turn up the volume. But I'll do the roll call for the people that are here in the audience. I can't really see on the Zoom link, Tim, but if you could take care of those. So
sure.
Eric Hansen?
Yep, I'm here.
And if you would remind us who you're representing.
Sure. Eric Hansen. I'm representing the 32nd Avenue District.
Zach Bopp.
Good morning, Zach Bolt, representing the Reinhardt neighborhood.
Chris Arnold.
Chris Arnold, representing Grand Forks Public Schools.
Brian Larson.
Brian Larson, East Grand Forks City Council.
I'll call out Tanya Kuntz. She is unable to be here. She has a sick child. She just informed us. Craig Wald.
Craig Wald, representing the Bigland neighborhood in East Grand Forks.
Dave Zaverill.
Good morning, Dave Zaverill here, representing the East Grand Forks Chamber of Commerce.
Kyle Kwame.
Grand Forks City Council, Ward 5. Here.
Andrew Budke.
Here, I live on the near south side of Grand Forks.
John Zabral.
I represent Reinhardt Township.
Josh Brown.
Josh Brown, representing Grand Forks Chamber.
And myself here in the room, and Mr. Dave Koryenko, Assistant City Engineer for the City of Grand Forks, is here in the room as well. So Tim, if you would take it from here for those on Zoom.
Yes, thank you, and hopefully you can hear me better now. I don't have any additional control over my volume, but if you're able to do it in the room, hopefully we're good. So, yeah, online by Zoom from TAC, I'll just call your name and ask you to introduce yourself. I see Wayne Zacher.
Wayne Zacher is here, North Dakota DOT.
And Nick West.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Nick West, Grand Forks County Highway Department.
And Steve Emery. And Steve is online, but maybe he stepped away. Christian Danielson.
Christian Danielson, City of Grand Forks Engineering Department.
Thank you. That's all I see. Is there anybody, I don't know where you would be, but anybody else that I missed on Zoom?
Hi, Tim. This is Steve Emery, consulting city engineer for the City of East Grand Forks. Sorry, I couldn't find my mute.
Yeah, that happens. And then also from the consulting team with me at Alliant, we've got Mike Konzioka and Hannah Johnson. So with that, I will share my screen. And just adjust my settings so I can see the right things at the right time. Okay. So, yes, we did send, as usual, the document you could flip through, as well as a wonderful PowerPoint with my soothing voice on it that went on for quite a while. So if you took the opportunity to listen to that, thank you. If you didn't, that's fine. I will cover the same information, and you could always go back to that. We did that because, as you'll see, or if you listen to it, there's a lot of words that go with these slides. Tried to keep things simple enough, but didn't want to lose the detail. I'll maybe go through this a little bit quicker with all of you because we do have time for discussion. I want to make sure we have time for that. However, knowing the number of people who are either watching live or will come back to this, I do want to give a nice thorough explanation that's useful for people that maybe don't have all the background of you, ad hoc group, and our TAC. So, moving on, some of the introduction material that I usually get to on these are agenda. We'll be finished up by 9:30, and I will try to save some time for your questions. Main topic is to go over these results of the evaluation of the bridge study, the traffic impact study. Before we do that, just the usual updates here on where we are. We are here in December, and we'll have this project wrapped up in terms of our consultant team work by the end of January, which will conclude with a report. What we're talking about today is really the sort of the finale in terms of conclusions and information from all the analysis that's led up to this. As I'll talk about it in a moment, still to come is a public input process, which starts next week. That's very important to the overall study. So coming toward the end, but very important. This, again, people keeping detailed track of what it is we are producing as the consultant team or have yet to produce. You see a lot of things on the left, which is good, and some more items still in the works, mostly wrapping up this evaluation process and then documenting the overall study, and then the final meetings, which I believe are also highlighted on this slide. This is more for the purpose of managing schedule and deliverables, and for our team working with Earl to get things out to you and others. So we've got this meeting today, we've got the public open house starting next week, and then another meeting of the TAC in January, and a final meeting of this group, the ad hoc group, also in January, yet to be scheduled. So, public open house. Just one slide, the whole forecast here. Again, the purpose is to get review and input on our draft evaluation results. And we'll have it both in person and online. So the in-person event will be next Thursday, the 16th, 4:30 to 6:30 at East Grand Forks City Hall. Earl will be there, as well as two staff from the Alliant team. And the online events, I should say two staff, not me. Unfortunately, I was not able to make it, which is painful for me. We'll be well represented by Hannah and Mike, but I fully intended to be there. The online event, so we'll start the same day and then run for 3 weeks so people can view the information online and provide comments through a survey. In terms of raising awareness of the open house, typical that we've used and that the MPO uses otherwise is public notices, some social media ads, and then you all are definitely part of that, and I assume you're talking to people already and can help share the information that the open house is happening. So with that, I'll dive into the evaluation results. And I will be talking a lot and fast, but feel free to stop me at any time because I would rather address your questions in the moment if we can. So there are a lot of slides, or a handful, a lot of words, I guess, that come before sharing the results. I've been doing this a long time, and I find it's a little bit complicated, plus there's lots of different ways to do an evaluation, and I want to make sure you sort of understand how we did it and why, so that the results kind of make sense. So purpose, sort of two purposes, comparing the two bridge corridors that we've studied, a bridge at 32nd Avenue and a bridge at Elks Drive, and asking, do those address the problems that we identified in the beginning? Do they address the purpose and need? Then the other big purpose is obviously to compare the two options against each other, and also against what we call the no build, what if we do not build a new bridge? So you'll see these three alternatives listed in the evaluation results. The results are projected into the future, in particular when it comes to traffic. That's sort of a standard planning tool and allows us to, not just look at today, but say, okay, the idea of investing in new infrastructure, it's a long-term solution, so we want to look out 20 years. So you can do it different ways, but that's sort of the bottom line is how is this going to work in 20 years? Is this going to address the long-term needs, transportation needs? So we evaluate using criteria, and those criteria flow from the purpose and needs. It's important to me and typical planning process to have a framework that holds together. One thing leads to another, so when we're here evaluating, we're not just making it up, but we're relating back to where we started. So trying to answer that first question, are we meeting the purpose of the project? Which at a high level is addressing the transportation needs, improving traffic flow and reducing congestion. And then are we meeting those specific needs, which you see listed here? And there were 5 needs or categories of needs that we identified in that purpose and need document. Mobility and congestion, multimodal system linkage, which is really just about providing better connections in the transportation system, crashes, community and economic factors, and environmental impacts. You'll see a note about crashes, that we are not evaluating those quantitatively at this point. We have the crash history. It is possible to do a look ahead for crash analysis, but we really need more detail than we have at this point. That said, we don't see a significant difference in the performance of these options with respect to safety. So I'm comfortable not having that information in terms of this study. Final note, there is cost, a very important component, having to pay for it, and then what are we getting for our money? I do keep that separate. Cost is sort of one item, and the improvements, the benefits are other criteria, but you'll see all that come together here at the end. So I won't go through all these items, but just to recap, these are the bullets here, and the sub-bullets are the rows that you see in the long list of evaluation criteria. Again, these are the things that we identified early on, and having these listed out allows us to go point by point and ask ourselves how do these different options perform against each item. So then the question is, well, how do we measure these? How do we count? How do we say one is better than the other? We have a range of ways of measuring. Most of what we're doing, a lot of what we're doing, we say we're at the planning level. And that is partly because we're looking into the future. Partly that is because we don't have detailed engineering drawings where we can count every last square foot. However, a lot of this information is based on traffic performance, so it is quantitative. It comes from our traffic models largely, which are well-tested and standard procedures, but they are models of what we expect the future to be. Those quantitative results are not down to the last single vehicle, but you see we have lots of quantitative results that are helpful in making distinctions between the different corridors and their performance. We also have qualitative results, things, say, in the environmental impact, where we can look at a map, we can get a general sense of better or worse, and that's what we've indicated in the results. And then this is getting into the details, but you'll see this if you haven't already. Sometimes the results are comparative, as we're comparing them to each other. And sometimes they're absolute because there is a standard, a performance standard out there that we're comparing them to. So traffic congestion, we have standards that we use, level of service, which you're familiar with. But other items, we can say, well, this one is more and this one is less. But there isn't an absolute standard that's used. Very important to avoid double counting. Often when we say, hey, what's important, and we list out a dozen things, and you go back and then try to count them, you realize you're counting the same things. So I think we have this pretty well set up so that it's not sort of overly weighted toward one item because it's been accidentally double counted. Related to that, this process that I've used, we are not scoring things and then adding up to get a total and saying, well, this one is 100 and this one is 80, so 100 is better than 80. That can be done. It requires multiple things. A couple things are everyone sort of who's involved in the decision early on agreeing in detail on how important each item is, so you can have them weighted. Not every criteria is the same. Not every need is the same weight. So in this case, rather than doing that, we're simply doing a pairwise comparison where and you'll see this if you've seen the results already, focus down on the places where the alternatives are different, where they've achieved a different result. And that narrows things down fairly well so we can see pretty well how the performance of one option compares to the other without trying to quantify it. Sometimes that quantification, it seems helpful. It can also be reductionist and get us to sort of overlooking things that are important. So we're getting through most of my preamble here, but this might be the last one. Again, the place I start is with these results is, okay, what do we have? We put out some options. We think they're helpful. We think they're good and worth considering. Rather than focus on winners and losers, it's like, okay, what do we do? What are these options doing to solve our problem? So you'll see that theme. But then definitely, does one solve it better than the other? If no new bridge, part of this is to validate that no new bridge has some drawbacks, and then to say, if that's the case, is 32nd Avenue Bridge achieve our goals better, or does an Elks Drive Bridge achieve our goals better? The public review, I already mentioned, it's important. This meeting is very important, and your feedback today is important, as is the public open house before we conclude the evaluation portion. And I already mentioned January meeting of the Technical Advisory Committee, who will have one more chance to review the results before we finalize them. Then we'll prepare this report. The report documents what we did, and it also sets the process up for a next step, which is to be determined. A reminder in terms of next steps is that we are running a process here which is consistent with what would be required for future environmental documentation. And the critical piece of that at this planning stage is we are not going to write a report that says this is the recommended alternative, because that gets you in trouble with the environmental process, which, yes, would be a subsequent step to this planning study. If this project moves forward, you need to have an environmental evaluation that is sort of open and starting from not a predetermined outcome. That said, everyone is allowed to their opinion. Decision makers can take this report. The report isn't intended to be neutral. It's just not intended to write down on paper and say, this is the best thing and we're going forward with it. Hopefully that makes sense. We're not recommending anything, but the evaluation results, I think, are intended to speak for themselves. Let me just pause there. Any questions on that background process, kind of how we did what we did? Hopefully you're not all asleep, because that was a lot for 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay, so I've got a number of slides like this going through the results. There's a lot going on here, but that's sort of where we're at, is that the details are important. So I apologize for me looking sideways here the way my screens are set up today. So this slide addresses the project purpose and addresses the mobility and congestion need. What you'll see in these slides that all look like this is the first column is the evaluation criteria, what it is. The second column is the measure, so what did we do to measure that? Some notes about where the information came from. And then we've got a column for the no build, a column for Elks Drive, and a column for 32nd Avenue. And then within each of those, we show what the measurement was, which might be a word or it might be a number, a qualitative, quantitative thing. Then we also have a rating. Rating is a symbol and a color. And the ratings are intended to be helpful because, as you can see, there's a bunch of information here. We have to be cautious with the ratings, though, because they do simplify things. So it's good to have both or come back and ask, okay, what was that rating again? You'll see the key in the bottom right for the colors. Essentially, green is a more positive result, down to red is a more negative result. We use those colors because they pop out and you can see the difference. Sometimes they probably exaggerate the differences. Dark red looks like bad, like a fire alarm. I wouldn't necessarily consider it that way. Again, it's important just to try to understand what each of these mean. So let's start with project purpose. Pretty easy. Are we adding a new bridge? That's essentially the purpose. Yes or no? No build does not add a new bridge, so it gets a negative result. The other two add a new bridge, so they're positive. Okay, so both options meet the purpose. But now let's talk about how well. So mobility and congestion is sort of this core measure of the problem and how we're solving it. So you see 4 rows here that we evaluate: congestion on the Point Bridge, congestion on the study corridors. It's actually the road segment that we identified on both sides of the river that are influenced by the bridge. And then 2 items related to intersections. The first is, as we look into the future with or without a bridge, how many intersections have congestion issues that need to be mitigated? That is, we need to do some adjustment to that intersection. And the second intersection item is what's left after we do that mitigation. Sometimes it's easy to fix, and sometimes it's not so easy. And that easy or not also is represented later in the cost. So just going through the rows quickly, we see if you look at the far 2 right columns, you'll see both Elks and 32nd have similar ratings. That is, in terms of addressing congestion on the Point Bridge and on the study corridors, they both get a dark green, a double plus. When it comes to is congestion mitigation needed? Yes, for both. However, you'll see they both have a similar number of intersections. And then will we be able to solve that congestion with the intersection mitigation? Yes and yes for both options. The yellow highlight on study corridor congestion is because there are a whole bunch of study corridors and each have their own result. What you see in the row on the screen here is the summary of all those, which is helpful and important. However, on the next screen, I do want to show you the detailed results, sort of corridor by corridor. There's a lot here. You can't necessarily see it well on the screen, but I'll explain what it is anyway. You see the rating, same colors but different measures, but green means a decrease in congestion, sort of greater decrease. And as we go down the middle, that gray, where there's an N, means there's no change in congestion. And then as we go to pink and red, that means there's increase in congestion. If you blur your eyes on this, you'll see it's a lot of dark green, which is good. You'll see a couple things that stand out with a red. Well, one red, which is under the no-build condition. Washington, the segment from Demers to 24th. Looking congested in the future, and that's addressed by both bridges, though not equally. So I will come back to a slide where, and if you've looked ahead, you'll see this, where I say, well, let's just not look at all the rows where things are the same, and then let's look at where these are different. So again, we saw at the top row, we're saying these both options address that study corridor congestion, but not exactly equally when you look at the individual road segments. So moving on to this one called multimodal system linkage, which is really about, the underlying idea is right now we have bridges at the north end of the cities. We have travel that's happening, people essentially traveling from the south to the north and then back to the south. So there's some inefficiency happening in the system that a new bridge could address, or at least that's the question. So the rows we see on this page, we have total miles of travel on the system. That's a measure of distance. That's the cumulative, how many vehicle miles are being traveled on the system. The second item is how much time does that take? What's the total hours that people are traveling on the transportation system? The next two are those same measures of distance and time, but rather than focusing on the entire area of the cities, we're focusing just on our study corridors, a smaller area around the bridges. Then the last row on bicycle pedestrian connectivity, a new bridge would have a bike ped trail on it to provide safe and more convenient access across the river. So this just says, well, how helpful is that? And maybe I'll start there and work back because you see both bridges on bicycle and pedestrian connectivity scored positively. We gave a little more weight to the 32nd Avenue Bridge because it's farther away from the next most bike ped bridge to the north that lands at 17th on the Grand Forks side. So
hey, Tim, I've got a question on length. Is this evaluation like per year? Is it per month? Is it per week?
This is, I might ask Mike to answer on these VMT and VHT numbers, or Mike or Hannah.
Yep, these numbers are annual numbers.
Okay.
Did you say annual?
Annual, yeah, per year.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I should have said that. Okay, so anyway, I think I explained slight difference in the bike ped number. So what I do want to say otherwise, again, if you sort of step back, you say, okay, both bridge options are green, which is positive, especially compared to the no build. So they're both decreasing the miles traveled on the system and the time spent on the system. That time is a function of reduced congestion, right? The more congestion, the more time it's going to take, as well as efficiency of travel. So these numbers will come back when we talk about benefit cost at the end. And I think if you can see the numbers, it's interesting to look at the no build, how many miles are people traveling annually on the system, on the whole transportation system, 1 million. How many miles traveled on just the study corridors? 200,000. These are big numbers. If you look at the changes and the decreases with the two options, 14,000 less on the whole system in terms of miles traveled for Elks Drive, 24,000 less for 32nd Avenue. Those in themselves compared to 1 million might not sound big, but if you multiply those out, the hours saved or the miles saved, and assign essentially economic value to those, which is how we do a benefit cost, there are significant differences that sort of pay over time in terms of savings on the system. So,
Tim, I need to jump in and clarify. I'm sorry. The numbers that you have up, these are daily values. In the benefit cost, those are multiplied out to an annual value. So sorry for that. For that clarification.
Thank you, Mike. So I'll just repeat that. The number's on the screen, and that does make more sense now that I said that. This is the total travel on the system. So just to put that into perspective, future no build, year 2045, 1 million miles being traveled per day on the sort of Grand Forks, East Grand Forks roadway system. Okay. Move on, and we can always come back and clarify. So this segment of results is the community and economic factors, a little bit of a catch-all. The rows you'll see here in the first two, I guess, are slightly violating my rule about not having double counting, because this is the same number we just talked about, total miles of travel on the study corridors. But it's in here because we're looking at it for a different purpose, which is, the first one was about congestion. That's what we were just looking at on the previous slide, and this is about changes in traffic on individual street segments. So we have two of those. The two highlighted rows is changes in traffic on all the roadway segments that we measured, and the second is change in traffic on study corridors adjacent to schools, to kind of highlight the schools issue. So just to take those two, here you'll see on travel study on the corridors, same number we had, so we see the same result for Elks Drive, which is a positive, and for 32nd Avenue, which is that double positive. When we look at schools, we see a positive rating for Elks Drive and a neutral rating, essentially no change for 32nd Avenue. And again, these two yellow items are ones that I will unroll here so we can see the difference. Again, if you can look at these, the numbers, if we look at the total change in travel adjacent to schools, we see we get a positive for Elks Drive because there's a decrease of 3% compared to the future no build. So again, 3% sounds like a small number, which it is compared to that total, but there are, you can see real changes depending on which segment you look at. So I will roll both of those rows out in a minute. Let's do the other three items on this page first. Consistency with approved transportation plans. The 32nd Avenue Bridge has been previously identified in the regional and city plans as a preferred corridor. So we did give a positive to 32nd Avenue and a neutral to Elks Drive. The Code for Economic Development is definitely a qualitative measure, and we give a similar rating for both bridges. If you sort of step back to the big picture, providing that increased connectivity and traffic flow and circulation, they both would have a positive effect from that standpoint. One other item that has been important is an impact to the greenway and that resource, which is both valued locally, and then it also has protections as what we call a Section 4F resource, a sort of park resource that has been funded and is protected from impacts from something like this, like a transportation project. So we did, score a negative because there would be a new bridge crossing the greenway. Greenway function would continue. It wouldn't be ripped up, or you could still use it similarly, but the new bridge over the greenway is something you had to acknowledge, and that's similar for both of these options. So let me move on to a long version of the travel study corridors in terms of what is the change in traffic. So if you look at the key here, again, green and red, and what we wanted to do, and I know it's been important all along, if we go back to the congestion slide, which I won't go back to, but that's one that looks just like this that we started out with. We saw lots of greens and just a couple of pinks and reds. That is our engineering standard for how the street is operating and whether the street is carrying the amount of traffic that it was designed for. So from that perspective, we saw good news really across the board, with a couple of exceptions, just a couple of segments of roadways, regardless of the option. They were all got a dark green. They were not congested by the engineering standards that we use. This is a little bit different in that there isn't a standard built in to these ratings, and so take them a little bit with a grain of salt in terms of, does this mean there's a problem? I would say from an engineering perspective, no. However, from a personal perspective, what's going on this or that block in my neighborhood or in a place that I care about. That's the reason for this slide. So there's a lot of detail here in terms of changes, how much would the traffic volume change? And again, these numbers, it's a little bit tricky, but what we have here is a vehicle miles traveled, which is a measure of the number of vehicles times the distance. So it's a way to provide some weight. So it's also confusing if you're looking at these numbers and trying to use them to count vehicles. That's not the right interpretation. But again, if you blur your eyes here, you'll see differences between the two, but you'll also see sort of similarities in that you'll see greens in the same places and reds in the same places largely. Again, I have another slide where we'll remove all the rows that are the same so we can focus on the ones that are different and ask that question, well, how is 32nd really compared to Elks Drive? Again, the comparison here is just between the two options. The no build you'll see is all scored as a neutral, just because that's considered the starting point. So if we take this to that smaller subset adjacent to schools, we have 8 schools, I believe 2 East Grand Forks and the others are in Grand Forks, where we had a roadway segment that we identified early on, where we have information that we can look at what is the change next to that school. It's important to notice that some of these schools we are adding together change in traffic on 2 different blocks where the school is essentially on a corner. So Phoenix, for example, the numbers you see there are 4th Avenue and Belmont combined. Similarly with Kelly and Schroeder, we've got Cherry and 32nd Avenue combined. So again, you'll see some differences here, and we'll again kind of squeeze those down so you can focus on where they are different. If you look again at the top row where we sort of sum these all up, you'll see a slight difference. They're quite similar, but we did give the positive rating to the Elks Drive option. So the other thing I'll say is, as I have what I think is a better way to look at this that will be in the public open house materials, which didn't make it into my slideshow. And so I'll just leave that as a teaser for you for the public open house. So we can come back and answer questions on this too, but I'll just keep going through a couple more to get to the end. Oh, well, I think we might have talked about this, but I did want to have some additional talking points about the school's issues. So I think that, the left-hand side of the screen is just to reinforce that, regardless of the bridge study, but as part of it, obviously, since I've started talking with you all, that safety around schools has been an issue and concerns about if we do build a bridge, what does that do? Does that bring more traffic by one location versus the other? We do know that Safe Kids Grand Forks has been doing surveys. They did another survey this fall of parents and I believe school teachers as well in terms of how kids get to school and concerns. So around a number of these schools, it's not a new concern, but it's a continued concern about safe access for kids, crossing the street, as well as congestion related to pickup and drop-offs at school. So might be obvious, but part of the point is this future bridge is it's a plan right now, may or may not happen, and certainly won't happen anytime soon. So those issues around schools are things that should sort of stay on the agenda for being addressed with or without a bridge. The other points, I mentioned the number of schools, and again, if you look at those results overall for the idea of a new bridge, is really, there's a theme of looking at balance here, the idea that the transportation system today is a little bit out of balance, as again, because of where the bridges are and where the growth and development are. Bridges to the north and continued growth and development to the south. So the new bridge does improve that balance on the system. Either new bridge would do that. We did see some differences, obviously, if we look at a block-by-block approach. Regardless, if a new bridge goes forward, there would be improvements at intersections, which we haven't designed at this study. You know, we have some assumptions, but we haven't done detailed designs. So traffic calming and safety features would be part of that, you know, anywhere they're needed, and certainly around schools where we know there's concern. A couple more slides here, and then we'll get to the cost and cost benefit. Environmental impact is important. It's probably more looking ahead to a future environmental study and trying to understand at this level, is there something that's like a fatal flaw that's like you would never ever do a bridge in this location. You see the rows here, which maybe I'll just read. Potential impact on flood protection system, so stability, impacts to community resources, to natural resources, farmland, visual, air quality, and noise. These are all done at a qualitative level, just to give that kind of general sense of what types of impacts we have. You see most things scored the same. You see some green. Noise and air quality are things that typically improve as you reduce congestion. The pink is really just to say, yeah, okay, if you build a bridge over the river and the floodway and over to East Grand Forks where there's farmland, you're going to have some impacts. These are things that can be mitigated, that would need to be permitted, so nothing rose to the point of being like a fatal flaw, but you see that negative, that pink, because yes, that is an impact on the natural environment. The one place at the top, or two places at the top where we did represent a difference. First row, potential impact on the flood protection system. Any new bridge would have to make it through the flood protection system, the levee wall. That's not an issue. The way we're conceiving the bridges, the Elks Drive could and probably would use the existing opening there. 32nd Avenue is probably more to be determined. There isn't a road opening at 32nd Avenue, so that would have to be created. Does not seem to be a fatal flaw, but there's a permitting process, and obviously it has to be designed so as not to compromise that system. So that's why there's a difference between Elks and 32nd. Soil stability, there is some historic information about what's underneath the soils under the Elks Drive and the 32nd Avenue location. There does appear to be a difference where there's some soil stability issues under the Elks Drive location and less so under 32nd Avenue, so that's why that is shown as a difference as well. So, I get annoyed when presenters say this is a terrible slide and I know you can't read it. So I'm a hypocrite to tell you that right now, but there's a lot on here, and actually there's reasons. There's a lot of assumptions that go into cost estimates, especially at this early level. So for those who are interested and want the details, there's a lot on here explaining how we got to the results. What I did here is add a better summary view of kind of the bottom line that I want to make sure to talk about. So we have three rows here, the bridge cost estimates, the cost to mitigate the intersections, that is to address congestion at intersections, and then a total. So bridge cost comes from last year 2020 study that was done, which showed estimated cost at Elks Drive of about $30 million, 30.3, and at 32nd Avenue of $36.4 million. That's where those numbers come from, and we see that $6 million difference. Intersection mitigation, if you remember back to one of the slides, we talked about how many intersections need to be adjusted for congestion, and it was 6 with Elks Drive. I should talk about the no-build. 5 with the no-build, that is no bridge. 6 with Elks Drive, and 5 with 32nd Avenue. They're not all the same, though, and particularly with the no build, if you look, you'll see the cost for intersection mitigation for the no build is estimated at between $17 and $25 million, which is a large number. See a much smaller number for Elks Drive and 32nd Avenue. The reason is that with no new bridge, the no build option, there's a lot of congestion on Washington Avenue and Washington and Demers. So there's been past study of that. How do we address that? That's a constrained corridor, so any expansion there would be very expensive. So this number assumes something called continuous flow intersection, which is really a reconstruction of a large segment of 32nd Avenue, Washington Avenue. Apologies if I said that before, Washington Avenue in the Demers location. So big cost, and essentially, it makes sense that would be captured if we're not addressing congestion at the bridge, which allows us to have this better spread of traffic on the system. We're going to have to do something more extreme on the most congested streets. So that's that role for intersection mitigation. If we add those numbers together, see a total estimate for the no build, a big range here, and again, cost estimates for this type of work early on are tricky because there's a lot that goes into them. So we are including ranges here to allow for the uncertainty. But no build range is about $17 to $25 million. Elks Drive, $32 to $33 million, and 32nd Avenue at $39 to $41. The related item here is looking at benefit cost. So a lot of you know, but that's a ratio of saying, what do we get for the money? And it's done in the typical way to get benefits is to add transportation benefits. There's certainly other benefits that could be quantified, that are harder to quantify, that aren't represented here. This has been done before on these corridors, transportation benefits added up, and so we are using numbers from a previous study that have then been adjusted to the present day. So transportation benefits that you can quantify, I mentioned that when we were talking about the system-wide benefits of reduced miles and hours of travel. That's a lot of where these benefit numbers come from. You can also include any reductions in crashes. Crashes cost money, including impacts on life and health. And then air quality as well is often included in the transportation benefit calculation. So rough estimated numbers of the benefits is about $30.3 million for Elks Drive and about $48.5 million for 32nd Avenue. That is a big difference, and that really comes from the sort of multiplication of the difference, albeit smaller, on a daily or annual basis. This multiplies those transportation system benefits out over a longer period. So that's the benefit line. Then we see the cost is that middle line, which is the numbers from the previous slide, and then an estimated cost benefit. You'll see these just as a rough number. It's less than 1 for Elks Drive, meaning the costs are greater than the benefits, and a greater than 1 for 32nd Avenue, meaning the benefits are greater than the cost. Those are intentionally not reported as a more precise number given the uncertainty in everything that came before, but the greater than 1, less than 1 is pretty solid if you look at the difference between those ranges of benefits and costs for each. And it's significant in that often, greater than 1 is the threshold to say, well, benefits outweigh the cost. This makes sense to do versus the benefits don't outweigh the cost. It doesn't make sense to do. So I believe, if you're still with me, go through a couple more slides here trying to just narrow down and pull out places that are the same and kind of focus us in a little bit on how the options are different. Obviously that benefit cost number is important and does show us a significant difference between 32nd and Elks, but I want to go back to some of the other items. So, put it on the slide here, consider, can the two options, Elks and 32nd, address the needs, yes or no? Well, if you look at that no build column where there's pink, did we improve that with the two options? Yes. So I think it's a yes. Either of these options can address the need. Then compare the two corridors, which I believe I've done on the next slide. Well, let's just stick here, but essentially, let's not look at that no build column anymore. Let's say, okay, we're better than no build. Then what do we have? So this next slide does that, takes away the no build, and also the overall categories where there are differences. So we see only 3 categories here because the others were the same, and then I pulled out the rows that had the same rating. So if we just take these one at a time, the multimodal system linkage, again, we see those are both positive in terms of improving the system and the balance. Not surprising, adding a new bridge does that either way, but we show 32nd Avenue with improved performance on those measures over Elks Drive pretty clearly. The community and economic factors, a little bit more mixed. The total travel on study corridors we talked about. Again, that does repeat the item above. The change adjacent to schools, we do see a slightly higher rating, as we talked about for Elks. Consistency with approved transportation plans, we see that difference at 32nd is consistent and Elks is not. And on the environmental impact side, we see sort of a horse apiece, as we talked about with the flood protection system and the soil stability. Again, none of these rows are necessarily equal to each other, but if we want to sort of keep a rough track and count, this is one way to do that. A couple more slides and I'll stop talking for questions. So again, this is the long version of traffic change adjacent to school, study congestion, and traffic change generally on all the roadway segments. So first, sort of look at all the rows. It might blow your eyes. Exercise only goes so far, so the point of the next one is to pull out all those rows that are the same, and then look at where they're different to try to get a sense of performance, relative performance. So we see some differences, and we see a lot of differences sort of in the bottom two-thirds, which is this measure of traffic change. Again, there's not an engineering standard being applied there. We see from a congestion standpoint that congestion is addressed. But in the interest of transparency and what are we talking about sort of on the system, I wanted to be able to share these changes with you. So you see, I think it's safe to say more of the darker color of the red on Elks versus 32nd, but you can obviously look to any given row and see some places where Elks is performing better and others where 32nd is. So, last slide. Key takeaways from my perspective, I'd be open to yours as well, but I've probably said it enough times, both options address the needs, check. Both options provide a more equitable distribution of traffic on the system, this idea of balance. Some of the congestion experience on the major routes, in particular on the Grand Forks side, there's a lot, and when you step back, you see why. In that there's, it's not, it's common for cities, two sides of a river with bridges. It's just what happens, and so the idea that a bridge helps spread that traffic out, there's a lot of logic there. Next, 32nd Avenue has greater cumulative benefit for the hours and miles traveled and a positive benefit-cost ratio. Those things kind of roll up together, and probably the weightiest in terms of transportation benefit, especially transportation benefit over time. School safety would be designed in with either option. That's the point about the intersections. What do we do at intersections near schools where we're going to see more traffic? None of the traffic, again, that we see on any of the segments is a a no-go from an engineering standpoint. However, as we anticipate changes with a new bridge, those design details really matter. And so that's an assumption going forward that many of those intersections would be taken care of with appropriate designs, and in particular traffic calming and safety. Again, the study is not formally recommending an option. However, it was certainly intended to shed light on the two options so that the project can move forward when it's time to do so. I said I was going to stop talking, but I'm going to go through these last two and then stop talking. This is envisioning a new bridge. If you've looked ahead, you'll see we do have a an illustration here, a simulation. Before I do that, the point on the left here is we have lots of cool tools we can use to simulate what something will look like in the future. We, however, do not have all the design details at this point, including, exactly where would a bridge take off and where would it land. So we're not showing that today because we just don't know that, and that takes some more detailed analysis and decision making. But we do know a lot of assumptions about this new bridge, which we've talked about all along. And just to repeat those, the bridge would be 2 travel lanes, 1 in each direction. It would be signs for trucks to not be allowed. There would be a separated bike and pedestrian facility on the bridge. The existing greenway trail would be routed underneath the bridge, so it would be continuous, and that would be similar to other bridges and how the greenway trail is treated. There would be a rise, but a relatively minimal rise in terms of bridge height from the street system on the Grand Forks side, estimating about 3 feet. And then the flood wall closure system would be maintained. We would not be compromising that. So here is our simulation, and I kept those same bullets up there. So this is Elks Drive. This photo was taken at Elks Drive looking east. Right now, that road curves kind of to the north. We have straightened it out to show how the bridge would look. And while this was taken at Elks Drive, we would expect to see it would look the same at your location. So again, you see the same features in bullet form, and you can sort of also see those borne out here with the pedestrian facility on the left, the travel lane in each direction. So here's the point. We have a good amount of time, which I'm happy for, assuming we go to 9:30 to have some discussion, questions. Again, I encourage your feedback today, and then appreciate anything you can do to help encourage people to attend the open house, and then we'll also look forward to seeing you in January. So with that, I will be glad just to open it up for questions and comments. Feel free just to speak up.
Hi, Zach Pope here with the Reinhardt neighborhood. A couple just kind of points I want to point out. Some of those negative impacts around the schools and stuff like that you're showing on there, I just want to kind of make sure I'm understanding correctly and point out maybe that it's a negative rating just because you're adding more traffic, but it's also alleviating some of the other issues by other schools, and with the future improvements that are tied in. I think that was kind of the point you're trying to make, that just because it's a negative rating doesn't mean it's a safety concern or one of those things. Some of those issues will be resolved over time through different projects. Is that kind of correct on that to start with?
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And there's a lot of ways to present these results, and we spend a lot of time trying to make it so that they're true and understandable. And I'm not sure that what you said is correct. I'm not sure the colors there quite do it justice, because those reds kind of grab your attention as suggesting there's something wrong there, which there isn't. And again, you'll see, and I may bring it up here and share it, if we use a comparison instead to the engineering standard, the congestion standard, we'll see that everything is green. We don't have congestion at those locations. We just need to make sure that they're designed accordingly to handle an increased traffic flow.
Okay. One other point too is, in similar method, I guess, is the Greenway service rating. Yes, where there's a downgrade to a point, but also accessibility to the Greenway by having these other bridge locations and possibly off-street parking nearby to some of these locations might provide better access to different locations along this Greenway to better utilize some of the southern portions of it. For a lot of the access points and parking lots are more towards the north end, bridges, so people tend to migrate north on that Greenway, but if there's better access along that south side, it might be actual improvement to the Greenway system for everyday use.
Well, that's a great point, because when you do compare it to the Greenway at the Point Bridge, which is very much a gathering place and all that really nice access and people's ability to get there, that's certainly much different now to the south. So that might be a place where the rating there really is a positive, or at least a neutral. If we say, well, yeah, there's a bridge overhead now, which might not be our first choice, but we've also provided better access. That's a good point.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Zach. Maybe I will just jump in right now and go around and call on people to make sure everyone has a chance here. In no particular order, Chris Arnold, questions, comments?
No comment.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Brian Nelson?
I don't have a whole lot to add other than what was on the key takeaway slide. Pleased to see that both options address the needs for our overall transportation system, and the 32nd Avenue option has a very strong positive benefit to cost ratio, which is encouraging, and that's what I was hoping to see from the data. So thank you for compiling everything in such an easy to comprehend way.
Well, you're welcome, and I hope others feel the same way, because it's hard to do. But thank you, Brian. Craig Wall?
Yeah, I just had one quick question. This is kind of quite a ways back in your slides, but there's an environmental impact slide, and there was something called impacts to community resources, which you had as a no change across. Was that was based just on, I guess I think I answered my own question, but just environmental. So could you maybe explain again what the community resources was? I maybe just missed that part.
Yes, I went over that quickly, and Hannah, if you're following, you could maybe remind me what that represents. It is a little bit of a catch-all, and it doesn't include things that are pulled out elsewhere, such as schools. I know when we set that up, it was things such as sort of adverse impacts on sort of environmental justice or low-income areas. I apologize for blanking out. We can look that up here and get back to you. So again, it was a high level. I think, the starting idea is it having, does one option or the other, sort of wipe out some facility, a park or a school. Again, we separated out schools, or have a particular adverse impact on a sensitive population. So that's what that was about.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Sorry.
Hi, this is Hannah from Alliant here. You can see we have a footnote on that one, which will show up on the big table. I just pulled it up here, and we have written that community resources include environmental justice, historical and cultural resources, parks, open space, and recreational areas.
Yeah, thanks, Hannah. Again, pulling out the school item, which we did separately, and the Greenway item, which we did separately.
Thank you. And then just one other thing I had, just you talked about how there would have to be improvements near the schools with either alternate, but also just to note that I think even with the no build, there would still probably have to be improvements as well. Just something else.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Let me just go back to, sorry, Sorry about jumping around here. This is one way to see that, though it's not too descriptive, but number of intersections requiring mitigation. So it's 5 with the no build, 6 with Elks Drive, and 5 with 32nd Avenue. So yeah, as we have increased traffic, it's really about baseline growth regardless of a bridge. Traffic will continue to grow. It's just what happens. Sign of a positive economy, even though it causes other issues, and we have to add new infrastructure. So that background traffic growth is really happening regardless of the bridge. The bridge just allows the traffic to be redistributed on the system. And depending on where we get here, some of the graphics we're going to use for the public open house, I may flip through those quickly just so you can see. We have some illustrations that, frankly, just too many slides for one presentation, but I will share those if we have time here because they might be helpful.
Yes, Tim, this is Earl, and I think our message is that there are issues around the schools that exist today, and we're encouraging those be addressed regardless of the bridge issue. What is addressed and put in place prior to a bridge will benefit and still be usable, still be effective if a bridge traffic is involved on those corridors. So that's the basic message, is that yes, a bridge will change traffic, but more importantly, there are issues that need to be addressed regardless, and they should be addressed sooner than later, not really tied to a bridge issue.
Tim, Zach here again, quick.
Yeah.
I think this slide kind of points out that issue. The intersections are there, but also it just changes the level rating, the service rating. If you don't do either of the bridge options, it's at an E or a C rating for the corridor or the point bridge congestion, versus if you add a bridge, it goes to an A or B rating for the overall system. I think that's the goal that we're all trying to show here, is that a bridge at either location would help that. That's what we're trying to find.
Yeah, I'm sorry, who was that speaking?
Zach Pope.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Zach. Yeah, that's well said, too. I could get some good help giving this presentation, I realize. Let me continue. Dave Beverly.
Most of the comments that I have been hearing from the public revolve around schools, so it's great that we're addressing those, and I think that would be important for us to take back to the community that these things will be solved without the bridge. So from a business perspective, the one thing that I noticed was the vehicles and the miles of travel in the day, and how any of these bridges will help reduce the amount of travel that people will be doing throughout their workday. So yeah, I think a no bridge build is not an option, and looking forward to getting a corridor set soon.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Dave. Kyle.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Kyle Kavami. So a few comments. I think back to that evaluation results slide that we were just talking about. I believe that's page 21. We have the potential impact on flood protection systems. I understand that you've got to keep kind of the no build as a no change, but I guess fundamentally I kind of think that not impacting the flood wall or flood protection system is kind of like a positive. So we show no change for Elks, but it's kind of hard. I guess from my perspective, I see that as a positive. So that's just a comment, really, that I kind of wanted to carry forward, because that's such a big. I feel like that's such a big issue with our community that to not affect it is kind of a big deal. So that's comment number one. Then on to evaluating the impact on schools. In my mind, I kind of want to add more weight to elementary schools versus middle schools. I don't know if there's any value to that, but in my opinion, a 7-year-old, walking across the street versus an 11-year-old is different, or 12-year-old, or whatever it is. So, when you look at the impact, it's a little bit more beneficial for an Elks Drive option versus a 32nd. But then if you were to just eliminate the 2 middle schools, then the disparity would actually grow. So just wanted to put that out in everybody's mind. I think reducing travel around schools is important, but I think that elementary schools is more important, only just because of the safety factor. So just something to think about. I know a lot of things that we do, we weight our decisions, professionally, and I just think, if it was a 0.85% factor on a middle school versus 100% on an elementary school or something like that, I think that when you evaluate the two options, you would see that it would maybe change it even a little bit more. So something just to consider there. And then more on, maybe this is kind of more of my opinion, but so looking at the miles traveled, Elks has a reduction in miles traveled, which I think is important. The Elks option has a lower cost, which I think is important. It reduces the traffic, like I said before, in the elementary schools. And then I kind of look at your cost-benefit analysis, and when you look at the 32nd Street option or 32nd Avenue option, it's a greater cost benefit. And so for me, I actually see that as a negative. I actually think that I see the inverse, in that if we're creating a community connector and not a thoroughfare, and not people exiting the highway and immediately going down through that path, I feel like the more beneficial it is, the less it serves as a community connector, and the more it would serve as potentially something that would increase traffic within our communities. So it's kind of, in my opinion, I want to create something that's equitable, and I do agree that we need to have a bridge. I think that that's something that's needed, but I feel like all these different signs keep, to me at least, pointing towards Elks as being something that would connect our communities and not increase traffic in an external fashion. And I think that's my big concern, is someone exiting the highway, hopping on 32nd, and then just, I'm not going to say, just cruising through the neighborhood, but that's what they'd be doing to go to the east side. So that's where, when you look at all these different things, I think it's really interesting. I think it's great data, and if you evaluate those few components, I think for me it just continues to say that Elks is a great option to consider, and I'm glad we have all this data, and I would just want to maybe share that perspective of that the most beneficial option, maybe it's too beneficial, and maybe that's kind of the point, is that I know that on our side of the river, we're really concerned about how does this impact our communities, and do I want to connect it with the minimal impact. And so that's where I feel like that it makes more sense. It continues to make more sense as we get more data on Elks versus 32nd. Anyway, that's all. Thank you.
There would be a couple of things that I would just add to your comments. Flood protection, the perspective I think you provided was a Grand Forks perspective. We have to also factor in that on the Minnesota side, there would be impacts, there would be openings that don't exist now. So that's why the scoring was a cumulative of both sides. And so, yeah, I understand where your perspective is coming from.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I appreciate
that. And then on the traffic, the thing to remind ourselves about the difference between Elks and 32nd, our travel demand model estimates about 1,000 vehicles more on 32nd. However, both Elks and 32nd draw pretty similar numbers from the bridge over the Red Lake River that connects 220 and US 2. So the difference of that local versus regional is really not that great. The 1,000 traffic difference would be roughly 50% more internal traffic, Grand Forks, East Grand Forks, plus then another 50% of that would be from that Red Lake River Bridge area or east of the community. So there really isn't a lot of difference between the tractant of that regional traffic from Elks or 32nd. So it's not really a huge, it might be a perception that if you're at Elks and you look at the numbers and it's less, that you're assuming that that's all because it's not drawing as much regional traffic, but the numbers are really, it's very similar in how they attract that regional traffic to either site. There's a draw for both of them to have that regional traffic involved. And that's the slight difference between the two. It's about 1,000 vehicles, and of that 1,000, it is split 50-50 as being true local traffic versus regional traffic. And we'd refer you back to the technical memos and the origin destination studies that we have done to kind of support that comment.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and Kyle, thanks for your comment, and clearly it gets technical fast. And I was going to say there's some more detail where we could essentially look into what Earl just said, because I think your point about sort of solving it too well, I hear that in that we're not trying to open the floodgates to regional traffic, but trying to solve the local traffic issue. And I think Earl made the point that sort of with some numbers about how that is being done, but we could certainly come back to that and present that information as well. Interest of time, let me keep going and ask Andrew.
Yeah, I'll echo some of the things that were already said about, I really appreciate the summary at the end here, right, where we're seeing that, like, yes, there is, like, overall benefits to these. One question I did have has to do with, of course, the no-build option and what number was being used in the cost estimates. So, of course, the big difference is, or appears to be in that intersection mitigation. So just so I have it clear, what we were talking about, like intersections around schools, that's kind of the same in all of them. The big difference is this continuous flow intersection number that you're kind of pulling in at correct, Washington and Demers. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And I was not familiar with that. I think I looked it up a little bit after the last meeting. That's not like a solution that exists in North Dakota currently. Is that?
You mean, is there an example that you could go look at somewhere else?
No, there is not one that exists in North Dakota.
Okay.
There are many that exist in Colorado. Might be the closest state that has quite a few of them. Montana has maybe one or two of them.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That was it.
Sure, and the way you asked that question, I think, highlights the nature of the issue there, and to some extent why we need to go to extremes to solve it, extremes being a new bridge or being some kind of like major project on that corridor, in that it carries so much traffic today and is projected to increase in the future that it's just not easy to solve. Obviously, you could not do anything and live with that congestion, but the point of this is to try to, there's a lot of negatives that would come with that as well. So
sorry, I did think of one other thing now to kind of piggyback on that. So these costs for the two bridge options, right, then they get rolled into that cost-benefit ratio in a subsequent slide. I know you didn't do that with the no-build option for obvious reasons, but like if we're talking about a ratio above or below 1, like in my mind, spending a whole bunch of money on a continuous flow intersection seems like that would be like a very weak cost-benefit ratio, right? We're just pushing more and more auto traffic, right, through like this one intersection, trying to do whatever we can with these, trying out a brand new design to, or not totally brand new, but new and unfamiliar to this region, and it's not clear to me that there'd be a whole lot of benefit to that.
Well, that's a good point, because you could do a benefit cost on that, because in a way it is a project, just like the two bridges are a project. But yeah, the benefit would be much more limited geographically, is kind of what you're pointing out.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good point.
Hey, Tim, can I jump in on that? This is Josh Brown. That was kind of one of the pieces that I had, so I just figured now's probably a good time for me to just jump in. So if you go back to that previous slide that we were just talking about with the costs of the no build versus the build, that one right there, I think to that point, I'm assuming that mitigation at that intersection is basically putting traffic flowing the same way as a bridge would put traffic flowing, right? Relieving the congestion. Is that kind of the assumption of what this continuous flow intersection would be doing?
Yeah, relieving congestion, specifically on Washington and and at the Washington Demars intersection.
It's just roughly an intersection geometry that has to be so expansive and different because you're flowing roughly 5,000 more cars a day through that same intersection.
Right.
And just that amount of traffic requires uniqueness in how you can get them to flow in acceptable level of service.
Right. And so I guess the reason why I was bringing it up is when we look at this from the public input standpoint is I think we want to make sure that that's super clear, because otherwise there's going to be a lot of public that are going to look at that and go, it's going to cost us $17 million to do nothing. Well, no, this would not be doing nothing. This would be doing something to relieve that. You know what I mean? So I just, from a clarity standpoint, I know we're been in these meetings and doing all this stuff, right? But from just a general public standpoint, I think there would be a lot of pushback to say, how the heck is this costing us 17 to 25 million to do nothing? You know what I mean? So just as far as looking at the different things and what the cost would be, I think that's definitely important from that public side to make sure that's very clear.
Yes, and I think you're also pointing out a thing that we struggled with how to really project this do nothing. If you look even at the impact on the schools, we have neutral, but that's neutral because it's comparative to the other two, but I'm sure the neighborhood would not feel that the do nothing is neutral to their impact on their school.
Right.
From what exists today, so yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And we're trying to address that in the public presentation. Tim and I have been going back and forth trying to make improvements. Okay.
Very good points. I appreciate that. Yeah, good points. Okay, let's see. Let's do John and then Eric.
John here. No additional comments at this time.
Okay, thank you, John. And Eric, last but not least.
I think there's been some really good points brought up, and they align pretty well with the notes that I had. The only other thing that I've kind of been paying attention to was the Tech Advisory Committee or Council, whatever it is, Tech Advisory. There's been a lot of discussion on that about questions asked on, are we actually creating problems by building a bridge? Are we creating new problems? And I just wanted to have a little discussion with, Earl and Tim could kind of address that. You guys have been in those meetings. And if some of the data that you've put forth today is in response to some of those questions, and if it has, if you could discuss that a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Eric. I'm trying to get my head into what you're hearing in terms of what you said in discussions at those TAC meetings. It's not ringing a bell, so maybe give me an example, or could you say a little bit more about what you've heard?
Tim, I'll take a stab at it.
Sure.
So, I believe the context is by doing nothing, we kind of know that we have Washington Demers, we have Washington Corridor, we have Minnesota Fourth Corridor. We kind of know that there's some issues existing in those corridors today, and there have been looks at how we can solve those issues. And then as we introduce a new bridge, we're changing traffic patterns. And then as we introduce a new bridge, because it changes traffic patterns, we're causing some of these mitigations at other intersections to be looked at. And so I believe in the context is that because you see that in the mitigations, we have identified those intersections that will be the key intersections that are impacted by the change in traffic, but we also look back to make sure that we're not creating any different or new intersection problems on those known areas. And in fact, you'll see under the 32nd Avenue that we do introduce that at Washington and 32nd Avenue, we do introduce a little more mitigation that we wouldn't have to do there without a bridge at 32nd. And so I think we all acknowledge that as we change traffic patterns, we also have to keep track of how we're changing it and making sure that we're not making things that we know already worse, or as we change traffic, we're addressing the intersections that are key, that are impacted. And I think through this study, we have chased that tail, if you will, through all the key intersections and identified several mitigation options. We are not identifying the exact mitigation option, but for cost purposes, we identified the one based on the methodology that achieved kind of our goal of what we wanted to happen at that, through those intersections. And so I think we have gone through a pretty good method that did keep track of all those pluses and minuses of all the key intersections involved in the community on both sides of the river. I hope that.
Earl. Yeah, I think that's what I was looking for there. That's all I've got.
Okay, thank you, Eric, and thank you, Earl, who is losing his voice, for giving a long answer. I appreciate that. With that, I think we're wrapped up, and it's 9:29 on my clock. Is there any last-minute burning question or comment for today?
I just would like to point out that what we've done here is initially we started out with a process that looked a little bit more into the environmental issues. If I were to contrast this versus the hydraulic study, the hydraulic study did identify that there were some fatal flaws in some of the sites, and they were eliminated. Through this study, we tried to identify whether there were showstoppers at either of these two sites, and as you see in the results, we really haven't been able to identify those. And however, that doesn't mean in a future project development process where the NEPA is delved in much deeper than what we are able to do here, that there won't be showstoppers at either of these sites. But that was one of the original intents of this exercise, was to see if there were some showstoppers at this level. And for both of these sites, you see the results versus what was going on with the hydraulic study.
Yeah, good clarification, Earl. It's never over till it's over with the environmental process, but hopefully we're providing some good foundation for moving forward on that environmental impact piece of things. So I'll go ahead and conclude here, and thank you for the time today and in the past meetings, and hope you'll be able to connect as part of the public open house as well, and then look forward to seeing you one more time in January.
Tim, I guess we do have some participants on the Zoom, and we should allow them an opportunity if they have anything they wish to add that hasn't already been said.
For sure, yeah, I can go through that list and start with Wayne. Wayne Bracker, any questions or comments before we close?
Oh, I think I'm good. Thanks, Jim. No.
Appreciate that. Nick West?
I have nothing, no questions. Thank you.
That's good. And let's see, Steve Emery.
I have nothing at this time. Very nice summary.
Thank you, Steve. Christian Dangson?
Just a quick question on the cost-benefit ratio. What time period is your benefit calculation run over, or how many years does that apply to?
Earl, I wonder if you know that, so I don't answer that incorrectly.
I believe it's a 20-year period. I would refer you to the Appendix C of the 2045 MTP, where it's documented.
I was going to say 20 as well.
That was all I got. Thanks.
Okay. And then I know Dave Franco is in the room there, not mic'd, but I guess, Dave, if you had anything?
No additional comments. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, anybody else I missed on Zoom? All right. Good for closure. So thank you again. And Earl, I don't know if you have anything else or if we are wrapped up.
Help us spread the word of next Thursday event. And it is in person over at East Grand Forks City Hall. However, and in addition to that, for 3 weeks, we will have an online virtual opportunity playing 24/7 for that 3-week period. So there's plenty of opportunity to still get us some feedback and input. And if there are some special type of one-on-ones or other things, reach out to us and we'll try to accommodate that.
All right, thanks everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good weekend.